Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Tabman, and welcome to Crimes and Times. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about a very, very important subject, the police use of deadly force. A little over a week ago in Missouri, an officer was killed during a routine traffic stop. And that is why you'll hear most police officers tell you no traffic stop is routine. It is the traffic stop, the family dispute, the minor calls which police officers get killed, sometimes not the shootout that you see on television. However, we bleed when we hear about the officer being lost. We cry for our loss. But when an officer uses deadly force, and it's not quite clear as to why he used it, we are not so understanding all the time. We tend to second guess. We want to have trials. We want to have hearings. And we want to hold the officer accountable. And officers should be held accountable for the use of deadly force. But at times, we have to sit back and think, what would we have done in that moment? Did we know what the officer knew? Did we see what the officer saw? Do we really know what we would have done in that same situation? It is not an easy call. Looking at everything in hindsight, as we say, is easy. But when you're on the street, you only have moments to make that call. You fear for your life. You're afraid of making the wrong decision. It's not quite that easy. Today, we're going to have two guests to help us speak about that. Our first guest is an old friend of mine, a partner of mine from years gone by. We were young. I was a young FBI agent. He was a young detective at the time. We were assigned to an organized crime task force in New York City. We were working a mob crew, and he and I stumbled upon something the FBI didn't want us to stumble into. When we were given a hint to back off, we didn't. And the conversation of what happened after that is for another day. But he's an experienced NYPD detective. He has 23 years experience and retired as a second grade detective. What we're going to first do is show a video of a police officer using deadly force. We want to warn everybody that this video is very disturbing. It is a Castile shooting up in Minnesota. We do want to point out that this officer was tried and he was found not guilty. We are not looking to relitigate this case. We just want to show what happened and discuss the incident and kind of pick it apart with our experts and see what kind of conclusions we could come to, what we know, what we think we know, and what we don't know. I want everyone to understand the difficulty in deciding whether or not a police officer was justified in using deadly force. Can we show the video, please? Okay, we're going to get our guests back on Skype. We have been having some trouble with Skype tonight. We are not taking blame for that this time. We think it is Skype. Please welcome retired NYPD detective, and my good friend Mark Zucco. You'll see that he and I, though we're good friends, we don't agree on much. So let's see how that works out tonight. Mark, you saw that video. You kind of had a chance to review it. Without going into details first, what is your first impression? What sticks out to you?
The first impression, it was a horrible situation that no cop should have to be in, but it happens every day. It was a horrendous shooting. We don't know what the cop seen. He was asking the deceased to put the gun down, don't grab the gun, calm down. He was trying to take over the situation. And the problem was he must have seen something that provoked him to start pulling the trigger.
Right. You make a very good point there about what did he see. But let's go from the beginning. As we watch the approach that the officer has, what do you tell? Does he seem like a cop on the edge? Does he seem ultra nervous,
No,
suspicious?
he seemed very calm. He was doing everything right. He was in conversation. He told him what the violation was about the tail light, and it seemed like he was controlling it pretty good. When the deceased says to him that I have a gun, number one, that raises everybody's blood pressure. And he did tell him, don't touch it, leave it alone, leave it alone, leave it alone. Apparently, something happened there where this guy, the deceased, grabbed the gun, touched the gun, which provoked him to pull the trigger.
Now, you and I have seen situations in these other tapings where officers, you could tell at the very beginning, they kind of worked up, sometimes the code 3 syndrome that we talk about, and
Yeah.
a little out of control, and we sense that they might overreact. But we don't sense that in this officer, in this situation, do we?
No, not at all. He was very calm. He had a partner over there that was on his side, backing him up too. And I mean, the worst thing I've seen was that little kid running out of the car. What a horrible situation, all the way
This
around.
is a heartbreaking situation, and it's
Absolutely, and it's the one that every cop has a nightmare over, pulling the trigger and killing a kid, God forbid.
yes,
So I really don't think he wanted to shoot anybody that day.
right. There's no
You know,
indication he went out there over the
but
edge or out of control, right?
right, and he did control the situation until everything went haywire.
Okay. Now, when someone has a weapon and they tell the officer, oh, we lost him again, we're going to call him right back. Once again, we're not taking responsibility for this. We think it's Skype, but we'll get him right back.
I'm back.
Okay, you're back. All right, thank
Shut
you.
me down.
Yeah, just when someone tells an officer they have a weapon, even if they say it's legal, what happens to the officer? What does he feel? If they say have a weapon is legal, does that lower the tension or raise the tension?
No, not at all. Not at all. The guy could be intoxicated. He could be even a fellow law enforcement guy, has a weapon. The thing that the cop does is what don't touch it. Put your hands where I can see them. Put them up on the steering wheel. I mean, a car stop is a dangerous situation in any circumstance for a cop.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But this particular one, he was trying to control it. He was trying to tell him, don't go by the gun. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. And that's what happens.
Okay, now you as a detective, you've investigated police shootings in the past, correct?
Absolutely.
So if you were investigating this one, what are the steps that you would take? What are the questions that you would want answered?
Well, I would, before I make any judgment on the case, and I'm doing that right now just by the video, which is not right. I would want to interview that police officer extensively, interview the witness, interview his partners, see the ballistics of what happened, see where the gun was found. There's a lot of things that has to go with a police shooting.
Right. So in other words, we have to do an investigation whereby we take witness statements and we have to weigh their credibility, but we also have to weigh it against the evidence we find.
Absolutely, and it all has to gel.
Right. And as you pointed out, we are now only looking at the video. The jury, who did find him not guilty, they saw a lot more than you and I and the audience is going to see tonight. A lot of evidence,
yes.
Statements. We have a couple questions coming in on Twitter. Let me ask you them. Trinity 3 asks, why did the officer not ask him to exit the vehicle when he said he had a gun? Based on what you saw, what is your professional opinion on that?
Well, you don't want him to exit the vehicle because then you're not controlling the situation. Once he's out, and if he's a bad guy, he'll kill you. So if you got him confined to the car, you got him controlled a little bit. So you don't want him to. We never wanted him to. We tell him stay in the car. Don't exit the vehicle.
And how would he have cooperated at that time and gotten out his license and gotten everything without making a gesture that would have made the officer suspicious?
How would I react to that?
Right. In other words, he says he has a gun. You say don't reach for the gun, but you already had his ID. So what would you want him to do? Like, in other words, just stand there with his hands on the wheel?
I would have him put his hands.
All right, we lost again. We're going to get it back real quick.
Could you hear me, Mike?
All right, go back again now, Mark. Start again. I'm sorry. You said you'd have him do what?
I would have him show me his hands, put him on hold the steering wheel, put him on the dashboard. I would tell him, don't. I would use expletives probably, and don't move, and to make really take over the situation, and to avoid him shooting or playing around with the gun. See,
No,
the big thing is we didn't like we said earlier, we didn't see what he saw.
right. We
He
didn't
may
see
have saw
exactly.
that guy playing around with that gun. He may have grabbed it. Who knows?
Right. We just don't know.
Was the guy intoxicated too? That's another thing I would want to know.
Right. And again, we're talking generally what the investigation would be. We're not speaking specifically about this case.
No,
Right. Okay.
no, on any case.
Now,
If I was investigating it, yes.
right. If you were investigating the case. Now, we often hear, you and I have heard, this old police axiom, cops say, and FBI just said, I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6. Sort of a bravado statement about, how do we react to shootings. But is that really
Yeah.
how we feel? What is the truth about what we as law enforcement officers feel about possibly having to take a human life?
The way that cops feel is not that way at all. They want to avoid pulling that trigger at all cost. There is no satisfaction in it, absolutely none. Nothing but headaches. All it is, a lot of people second guessing you, looking at you. You know what cops want to do? They want to sign out at the end of the tour and go home to their families. That's what they want to do.
And are they not afraid in that hesitation of making the wrong decision and maybe wrongfully taking a human life, even though they may have acted correctly police procedural wise? Who wants to live with that, hanging over them?
Absolutely no one, unless, believe me, I've seen cops cry like babies after something like that happened.
Right. That's something the public never sees.
Never.
Right. Mark, you once said to me that you thought the police are shooting more now than in the past. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know that for a fact. I don't look at the statistics, but it's definitely more publicized. I feel that when I was trained in the police academy a long time ago, I'm not going to date myself, but it was a long time ago. We were trained differently. We engaged. What I mean by that,
Yes.
we were trained to take over the situation, use physical force. When a suspect resists and he puts his hands on you, you have a gun on you. Now, it's only a matter of seconds before that suspect could get your gun. So I'm back. I'm
You're
back.
back. You're back. It seems to be at every certain intervals.
We would try to control the situation by like a shock and awe. If the guy starts rolling around with you, we would train to hit him, to subdue him, and to take over the situation. And a lot of times it's more ugly that way, but it doesn't escalate to a shooting. Like I see today, the cops are trained a little differently. They back off. They got mace. They're playing around, rolling around. The thing gets worse. The guy is drunk. It's a mess. We were like, tackle him, get him down on the ground, and put the handcuffs on him. That was how we were trained.
So do you think that cameras now have played a positive role and a negative role in policing?
The cameras and everything, well, absolutely. It makes cops think twice before they want to do anything. I mean, it's making their job, I mean, it sounds good and it looks good, but it makes them hard. Everybody's going to scrutinize everything they did. Years ago, the chokehold was the way you were taught in the police academy, because it was a very effective way of controlling a situation, controlling a bad guy. I remember one incident when this one emotionally disturbed person was flipping 4 cops around a room like they were paper dolls, and injured 2 of them pretty severely. One smart cop got behind him with his nightstick and did a chokehold on him, and I could knock them down and was able to control the situation. The other 2 cops went to the hospital.
And you think now,
times are different now, and that training is different.
Right, you think maybe because of the cameras, police are more hesitant to use that kind of physical force because of the optics, but then as a result, they have no other choice.
Look terrible.
Right, then they have the result of
deadly
force.
What you have to do. Police work isn't pretty sometimes.
Let me get some of the questions coming here. One person asked, Drake asked about body cam. I do not believe he had his body cam on. Mark, do you know anything further about that? The body
I
cam on in this
don't know.
case?
If he had his body cam, you maybe would be able to see a little more. I think if he did, we would see that. They had the cam from the car. That's what we're looking at.
Right. And I think they would have released that, and then we would have seen what he saw, which
Right.
again makes it
Right.
so difficult to make a decision. And again, we did not see what the jury saw. Rather,
Yeah.
we did not hear what they heard. Another
You
question.
you got to remember too. The people got to understand. This cop's got to make a split-second decision, which he's going to have to live with for the rest of his life. If he makes the wrong one, his life is not going to be the same.
Okay, folks, we just do that again. I adjust my earpiece here, and we're going to call him right back. We have one more question coming in for retired Detective Mark
And
Zucco.
I'm back.
All right, thank you. It's about every 2 minutes and 45 seconds, for some reason, Skype goes out. We have a question from Magic Mike. He asks, are police being trained as warrior cops, and is that partly to blame? Your opinion, please.
I don't believe so. I don't. I think they're being trained more on the liberal end, not the warrior end, not at all. They're learning how to deal with people. I just was with a rookie cop today, and I was asking him a couple of these questions, how they were training. The training is a lot different, but the use of deadly physical force training is exactly the same as it was 40 years ago.
Okay. Mark, and you and I want to point out again that it's always easy to second guess. Hindsight's easy. But when police are tried, every defendant, has to be tried based on a reasonable doubt. Do you see anything wrong in giving police the reasonable doubt, giving them the benefit of any doubt that might exist in a shooting?
Absolutely, for the mere fact that he has to make that split decision, you have to give him a reasonable doubt. The cop does not want to get involved in a shooting. People think that it's all glory like television. You shoot 3 people and you go home and have a couple of drinks and everything's wonderful. It's not like that. It's a nightmare. It really is.
Right. It's easy to second guess, but we never know what's in that officer's mind. And even though he may make a mistake, it doesn't mean he had criminal intent. People can make mistakes. They can be wrong, but it doesn't mean he made a criminal act, right?
Absolutely. We're all human, and they can make a mistake very easily, especially in a high pressure situation.
Okay. Mark, before we let you go, I want to thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for your years of friendship. I got to tell you, when I worked with you, working organized crime, I looked to you for guidance. You were quite a mentor to me, and I appreciate that. Is there anything else you want to say just about the subject before we let you go?
Absolutely. It was a good time back then, and we were young.
Yeah, that we're not anymore. Well, thank you so much for your time.
I think we made a dent in organized crime in New York anyway. We did a little bit anyway.
I think the FBI and NYPD did an outstanding job in cutting off the head of organized crime. They're still there, but they're nothing. They're a shell of what they used to be.
Absolutely not the same at all.
Thank you very much for your time, and I'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome. Take care, Mike.
Thank you. Still on? I guess I'm still on. Let me put my earpiece back. All right, folks, we go to break in a second. That was Detective Mark Zucco, and I think we made an important point that it's very easy to look in hindsight as to what an officer did, but I have no problem giving them the benefit of the doubt. Until you've been there, you can't understand the fear and the hesitation that goes on when you have to make that decision. We do fear, as law enforcement officers, making the wrong decision, but someone may panic, they may make the wrong decision, but it doesn't mean that they were criminal. When we come back from our break, we're going to have on an retired FBI agent who's an expert in the police use of deadly force, and we'll get another perspective on not just that shooting, but police use of deadly force generally. Please stick around. Welcome back, everybody. Uh, just before we heard from an experienced New York City police detective, and that was the experience sort of on the ground level. Now, in the FBI, there are times that we are subject to the use of deadly force, but not quite as often as a New York City police detective. But the FBI is charged at times with reviewing the use of deadly force by police officers. And we have with us an expert, as a retired FBI agent who has done that. Please welcome Richard Schott. Richard? Can't hear him. Hold on, I'm having trouble. All right, folks, once again, a little technical problem. We're working out. Richard, can you hear me? Richard.
Yes.
Okay, we had a little technical issue there. Just so you know,
Okay.
as the audience has seen, Skype's knocking out literally every 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So if that happens, we'll call you right back. Just stay there. We'll get you back on. Richard, tell us a
Okay.
little bit about your background in the FBI relating to your expertise in the use of police deadly force.
Sure. I just completed an almost 28-year career with the FBI. My first assignment was in rural Alabama, and one of the first assignments I was given was to work civil rights investigations in a 7-county area in Alabama. And when we say, as you know, civil rights investigations, the highest profile type of civil rights investigation that the FBI conducts and prosecutes through the Department of Justice, or what we refer to as color.
Okay, we're just getting Richard back, folks. We're sorry. As we said, Skype literally on cue goes off. Okay, I was having a little trouble here. All right, let's cut to I'm going to cut for a second, folks. Get him back on and come back on. Please stay with us. We apologize. Back on.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Yes. Okay. This has happened with Skype all night.
Okay.
And we'll just call you back again if it happens. It seems to happen every 2 minutes and 45 seconds.
Okay.
All right.
And I'm not sure when I cut out, but
You were saying
I'll
you're
cut
talking
to the
about color
chase.
of law. You were investigating cases, color of law.
Color of law, and I think more relevant to tonight's discussion is the last 16 years of my career in the FBI. I was assigned to the FBI Academy, and more specifically, the Legal Instruction Unit, where myself and my unit, we instructed on the use of force, and more specifically, including the use of deadly force. And we all agreed in our unit there was no more important a topic to convey to the new agents going out into the FBI than the law of using force.
Right. And before we get into the specifics about the use, I want to just clarify for the audience the FBI's role. If you could just very quickly explain why we do the civil rights investigation, what it is, so they understand that the FBI is not a sort of a police force of second resort. We don't supplant internal affairs. We have a very specific purpose in the investigation.
Absolutely. And in fact, the case we're discussing tonight, I'll point out, Uh, the officer was recently, as you know, found not guilty. He was he was prosecuted for a state second-degree manslaughter charge. He was not prosecuted by the Department of Justice or the United States.
Okay, and you heard the discussion about this particular case, and again, we're not relitigating it, but as an expert in the use of deadly force, what stuck out to you in the video that we saw?
I'm not sure if your audience could hear the audio of the dash cam video. On my end, I could not tonight.
Oh, that would have been
However, I
important.
have
Yeah.
heard the audio portion of the videotape, and I can tell you what jumps out at me right away is how often the officer makes the statement very boldly, don't reach for it, don't touch it, don't go for it, telling me that he believed, whether it was accurate or not, he believed the decedent was in fact, in his mind, reaching for what he believed to be a weapon. Sadly and unfortunately, that belief.
I've got you back there, Richard.
Okay.
Right. Last thing you said was
Unfortunately,
sadly
that
that
belief,
belief that he was that the gentleman was reaching for a weapon.
yes. And as I was saying, sadly, that belief may have in fact been a mistaken belief, but that does not make it a criminal action on the part of the officer. As long as his belief was reasonable, as required by the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, then it was a lawful shooting under federal law. And apparently, as the defense of self-defense in the state of Minnesota allows, it resulted in the acquittal under state law as well.
Right, and I think you make a good point. If the audio was not heard by the audience, because we can't tell from this end, the officer starts out very calm. He asks for his identification. The driver complies. The driver complies. And then he tells him that he has a weapon. And the officer very calmly says, do not reach for your weapon. And then he immediately goes say, don't reach, don't reach. And you can hear the tension go up. His voice raises, it gets louder. And then when after he shoots, you could hear by what he says and how he says it, how distressed the officer is at that moment. Would you agree with that?
Very distressed. And it didn't come up with your conversation with Mark, but I will point out, if you let that video play out, it goes on for, I think, about 7 or 8 more minutes. The officer, and I'm not justifying anything, and I'm not minimizing the tragedy of the loss of life suffered by the family of Mr. Castile in that case, but the officer was extremely upset. And oftentimes, as Mark would have told you, and as you know, when you have a conversation with a law enforcement officer who's involved in a fatal or non-fatal shooting, they often make the comment, I don't know why he made me do it. I wish he hadn't made me do it. If he had just done what I told him to do, I wouldn't have had to shoot him. That always strikes me when I talk to individuals involved in these type of encounters.
Right. It was a very important point, which kind of plays into what Mark was saying, that despite what people think, officers don't want to get involved, that they don't want to shoot anybody, and we do have that fear of making that wrong decision.
Absolutely, and in fact, I would go one step further. If an agency is able to determine that an officer, in our case in the FBI, an agent, wants to
All right, folks, once again, the technological issues. This is a great conversation with some great experts, but the technology is killing us. Let's see, we get, there he is. We have him back on.
Yeah, what I was saying is, if an agency determines that an officer or an agent would like to use deadly force, then that person has no business being in law enforcement.
Right, and I'm sure all of us would believe that no one joins the FBI, joins the police department, saying, I want to go out there and shoot somebody, but sometimes things happen, and sometimes they make an honest mistake.
Yes.
Right. Now, what do you see as the biggest issue in police use of force now? Do you feel that police are shooting people more than before? Do you think it's more publicized? Has the use of cameras hurt or helped the perception of the police use of deadly force today?
Yeah, I don't want to comment on something I'm not qualified to, but I will make some comments. Maybe it's more opinion than factual knowledge. The past 2 to 3 years, the Washington Post has probably kept the most comprehensive database of law enforcement shootings in this country. And the number over the past, again, 2 to 3 years, mainly since the Ferguson situation, the number has been right at 990 to 1,000 per year. That is about 2 to 3 times more than it was when I was teaching at the academy during the first decade of the 2000s and up till 2015. My thought is the numbers that were captured before the Washington Post got into the endeavor was captured by the FBI, and reporting was voluntary on the part of local law enforcement agencies. What that tells me is apparently a lot of agencies that had officers involved in uses of deadly force were not, in fact, volunteering that information for whatever reason to the FBI and our compilation of the statistics.
So give us.
I don't know that law
ahead,
enforcement is using deadly force more or not, but it is more reported. It's more visible now, I believe, than it was, and part of that is because of the proliferation of cameras, body worn and dash cameras, and other type of surveillance cameras out there.
And we're probably going to lose you in about 20 seconds, so even less. And we're going to call you right back to wrap up. We're going to want to get your impression of, your opinion as how you would have investigated that case compared to the way Mark stated that he would investigate the case, the different perspective. So I think let's get started, but there we go. All right, folks, we got this down to the minute when Skype goes out. 2 minutes and 45 seconds on the button.
Okay.
All right, so we have 2 minutes and 45 seconds to the next one.
Okay.
How would the FBI go about, a case of police use of deadly force, not specifically the tape we looked at, but just in general, as compared to what the PD would look at?
I think the FBI, when I was working civil rights investigations, color of law, use of force, very similar. Obviously, interview all of the witnesses, acquire all of the forensics evidence that is obtainable. Nowadays, we would be looking for any other cameras that were in the vicinity, whether it's on a storefront, a crime prevention type of security camera, because depending on what angle you see that situation could greatly cause a differing account of the situation. The one unique thing is NYPD, if they're investigating one of their own involved officers, or the FBI, we would investigate our own agent involved in a shooting. If you're investigating your own from an internal affairs standpoint, at some point you can compel a statement from the officer, the results of which, if it's truly compelled, cannot be used against that officer to prosecute him or her. In a criminal case, the investigative agency, the FBI, in a color of law case, we can never compel a criminal defendant. In this case, the officer being the criminal defendant.
Right, because we have no
administrative,
Fifth
Amendment
control.
Miranda rights.
Right, it's strictly a matter of criminal prosecution.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Right, we don't, because we have no administrative interest in that.
Exactly.
We're looking at only from a criminal prosecution. In your experience,
exactly.
Have you ever sat down with the prosecutor, and the case is, on the edge? It's a matter, could we give the officer the benefit of the doubt, or do we want to take him through a trial? Have you been at that point where the evidence is just not clear, but it's just a matter of the credibility of the officer, and you decided not to prosecute because you just felt it wasn't a strong case and the officer didn't deserve to go through that?
I don't think I have individually. I have been consulted on cases with U.S. attorneys throughout the country where they're struggling with the decision whether or not to prosecute at the federal level. And really, I don't get involved in the prosecutive decision, but I try to explain uh, some of the things you and Mark have already brought out, things like making that. Yeah, what I would reiterate is to a prosecutor, federal prosecutor, is the officer had to make that split second decision in literally a split second. And he or she has to live with the consequences of that split second decision for the rest of his or her life, be that decision right or incorrect. Because as we've talked about, even a perfectly justified shooting is very difficult for a law enforcement officer to live with. And I'll finish with this, if I may. I wish I could take credit for the language, but this comes from the seminal use of force case in the United States from the U.S. Supreme Court. The then Chief Justice William Rehnquist in Graham versus Connor pointed out that these split second decisions, which remain with you for the rest of your life, if that's not bad enough, they're being made in situations that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. That is a very, very difficult situation that our law enforcement officers are confronting day in and day out in this country.
And last thing before we let you go, as an FBI agent, do you find it difficult to go in there and not second guess, but sort of investigate the decision of another law enforcement officer?
It's difficult, and I've had fingers pointed at me. And we know how to investigate. We know what we're doing. We don't need the FBI here. That's a mandate that goes well before our time. The civil rights statutes have been around since the 1800s. It is, for what it's worth, it is a layer of oversight of not only local but state and federal law enforcement officers and agents that the FBI has been mandated to perform.
Excellent. Richard, thank you so much for your time and your expert opinion. We're going to let you go before we drop you by accident anyway, because of technology.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your expert opinion. We'll be in touch.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Thank you. Well, folks, you've heard it. Okay, everybody, thank you for being there. We had sort of a record audience tonight, I'm being told. We had a number of really good questions. I want to thank you for joining in. Again, we're sorry for the technology failures. We are continuing to make that better, and probably in a show or two, we'll have every little kink worked out. The important point tonight is I wanted us to be able to take a fair look at police use of deadly force. Yes, I had on 2 law enforcement officers. I'm a law enforcement officer previously, so I guess you could think we looked at it somewhat biasly. But I wanted everyone to understand that it's not an easy decision officers have. They have to make that quickly. And it's not a quick decision as to bet on red or black. It's a decision to use deadly force. 1, we may take someone's life. We don't want to be wrong. And 2, we want to go home also. Officers have a right to defend themselves. Officers must be held accountable. Every time they use force or deadly force, we have a right to ask. It should be investigated, and they should be demanded to explain what they did and why they did it, and it should be justifiable. We must hold them to the highest standard, but we cannot hold them to superhuman standards that nobody can meet. They are just human beings. They will panic, they will have fear, they will sometimes make the right decision that turned out wrong, meaning the situation was such that they were reasonable in fearing for their life or fearing for someone else. When a jury makes a decision, please remember they are seeing and hearing evidence that you and I don't see. Just like tonight, we looked at that video. I'm sorry, you didn't hear the audio from what I understand. That was very important. But we see that and we could discuss it. We could make some of our own conclusions, but we are not seeing what the jury saw, and that's why they make decisions as they do. I believe there is nothing wrong in giving officers the benefit of the doubt. When there is a bad officer, hopefully we get them. We have seen some videos of officers whose behavior was not defensible, and they were held accountable both to the criminal justice system and administratively. So please, let's remember, if you do have a weapon, let the officer know, keep your hands visible, follow his orders. And yes, when an officer stops you, he can lawfully order you out of the car, he can lawfully order you to show your identification, and he does not at that moment have to explain to you why he has stopped you. He will do so, but by you demanding that, you are only heightening the tension that goes on, and we don't want that to happen. Everyone is tense, including the officer. please follow their lawful orders. Follow their lawful orders. Keep your hands where they can see them. If you're carrying a weapon, let them know and do everything they say. I'm Michael Tabman. That's my take. See you next week.